Hello, 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 and it's one of those days where something turns up that you've been waiting for quite a while. In fact, this actually turned up really quickly. I won this on eBay about a week ago, and it's from America, so it's had to travel all the way over. It's a priority mail, tracked and insured. Oh yes, it's not very often that what is inside this box actually comes up on eBay. But before we talk about it, let's get it open. At least I'm hoping it is what I think it is. It might not be. Oh my good grief. Oh god. Oh, it's a lot smaller than I thought. Holy moly, it is. What a piece of history. Yeah, definitely 1980s electronics. Oh, 1970s. I'll talk about what it is in a little bit. I'm far too excited to see what the inside looks like because there was no shots of it inside. To be honest, even if it isn't in there, I was planning on building it on a piece of stripboard anyway. So the thing that the stripboard version of this would have lacked would have been the front panel, and that's what I've got. So even if this is completely empty, it's still a bloody win. This is gonna be cool. It's in there! Oh, it's such a mess. Oh my god, it's got a letter from the builder. This thing was built by Jerry Halenue, 1974, and Lee DeBerry, class of 73. It was built as school cabinet by John Fleck, class of 75, completely disassembled and rebuilt by Tobias Jackson and Jerry Plitzek in 75 and 74. Wow, this is more history than I was way expecting. So that's amazing. This thing was either built in a college or a university or something like that. Class of 74, 75, you know, they'll be, what, like in their 50s, 60s now? So if you know these people or you are these people and have found this video, then please comment below because I'd like to know what your stories are about this specific machine. How cool is that? That's why you need to write your name inside of all of these random machines that you build because you never know where it might end up. So having a really quick look through it, it doesn't look that bad at all, and I'm amazed at actually how simple it is. Like everything looks pretty well soldered together-ish. It's messy, but it's been soldered together reasonably well. Oh no, there's a broken bit. You know what, I'm just gonna plug this in and see if it kicks into life. That'll be amazing. Right, it doesn't sound pretty, and I'm not sure whether that's because it might be a little bit broken or that's just the way it goes with this thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take it apart, I'm going to have a look around, sort of gut it, give it a clean, but this thing is a piece of history regardless, and it's going to actually be a nice thing for the museum. I'm not going to put this in a cabinet or anything like that. I'm going to leave it so it can be played, and yeah, it probably will be played quite a bit because it's weird. It literally doesn't make sense. So the story with me and the Psych tone begins about a month ago when I got hold of an SWTPC 6809 computer for a project. And I did quite a bit of reading up on SWTPC, the company behind the 6809. Before they got into computers in the mid-70s, they actually made kits for hi-fi amplifiers, this, that, and the other, and even synthesizers, like tiny little synthesizer kits. And this was in the late 60s and early 70s. And that's where the Psych tone comes in. I saw this when I was scouring across the internet about the SWTPC, and initially when I searched it up, I couldn't find any remnants of this machine. However, a kind fellow by the name of James Galambos sent me this in an email. It is the Popular Electronics February 1971 cover story of the Psych tone. You will notice that this Psych tone is actually a tiny little bit different to my Psych tone. If you look carefully in this blurry kind of printout of what James sent me, it says Popular Electronics Psych tone, but regardless you'll see that it looks exactly the same. It's the same thing apart from a different logo, and this magazine article describes in detail what the fudge is actually going on. This is a new and unusual approach to music synthesis. The sound it produces are modern to say the very least, and the operation is extraordinarily simple. Technically Technically, this is a pseudo-random sequence generator, operating as a tune computer with tempo, voicing, selection, tone shaping, and pause gates. You've got to remember that this is in February 1971, so it's actually very early on, and it's actually a very, very early programmable analog synthesizer. Beethoven couldn't synthesize music like a Moog, nor could he be programmed to turn out a melody of the listener's own choosing. The Psych tone doesn't do those things either, but it is a real composer of synthetic music. Set up on its internal digital computer are 1,728 different 63-note sequences that can be selected and combined with any of 63 pause combinations to produce 108,864 different melodic lines. So on the next page we get a rundown of what's actually going on. You've got the power supply, you've got the tempo generator, this is the clock generator, and then you've got the tune computer, which is sort of encompassed in this thing. You can see it says tune computer, and as we go further in you'll see it's definitely not a computer in today's modern definition of what a computer is. This all connects together to become the actual synthesizer part. So this is the schematic of the tune computer. It's not by any means a computer in today's standards. It is literally a fair few chunks of logic gates, and we'll look at this in more detail in a little second. This magazine also mentions the Muse by Triadex, which is a synthesizer that works on a similar premise. These are impossible to find as well, and the link for this magazine article, if you want to peruse it at your leisure, is available below. Well, I've actually done quite a bit of work on the SWTPC in the past few days. You'll see that it is a little bit cleaner on the front. I've cleaned it up as much as I possibly can, and on the back you will notice that I've actually put in another power supply. The thing is, in the UK, is I need to use a step down transformer to go from 240 volts to go to the American 110 volts, and then the 110 volts goes down to 24 volts and 3.6 volts. So I decided to completely circumnavigate it and then put in a non-intrusive modification that is basically a power supply that basically takes a 24 volt laptop charger. As you can see, the rest of it hasn't actually changed much. I cleaned up a few dry joints that were being a little bit temperamental, but now it is pretty reliable. The reason I can't go any further into it is because John Fleck, who made the cabinet, has decided to build a cabinet around it, and it's made it absolutely impossible to get it out. It's been glued together, and the only way for me to actually get to the rest of the circuit and into it, I'd have to pull apart the cabinet. It just seems a shame when it is actually working a-okay. So after a fair bit of contact cleaner, repair on some switches from the top, a bit of polish, a few dry joints being cleaned up from the top, and also removing the big capacitors we don't need anymore because we've got a new power supply. Well, yeah, it's working quite well, surprisingly. So the voicing of this thing is quite similar to an organ. What you were hearing earlier is actually just the oscillator. For some strange reason, just the oscillator comes out of this, but the actual output, which is now around the back, to avoid people pulling it out in the museum, it goes through an envelope generator and a tone selector. It's funny because it says in the magazine piece it can sound anything from a violin to an oboe or something like that, but as you can tell, you know, that takes quite a bit of imagination. So how does it work? Well, the sequencer works by these three multi-select switches. You could select between any letter between A and M on all of these, and depending the combination you select up here is sort of the sequence that it plays. And then you can adjust the ratio at which these rotary switches affect the oscillator with these ratio knobs. So as I adjust these ratio knobs, you'll see what happens. Down here we have a rather curious pause select, and this adds pauses to the sequencer. And like above here, there is no real sensical approach to it. It is still based on a rather, you know, you push and you hope that it sort of makes what it wants. Who could forget such SWTPC classics as Dance the Night Away and the heartthrob love story song A Lone Dog on the Prairie? So with all of this in mind, it's got a very strange and intriguing sequencer, and that is thanks to the internal sequence computer, which isn't really a sequence computer, it's a bunch of logic gates. These squares at the top are actually what are called flip-flops, and they're not the flip-flops that you wear on the feet, they're flip-flops that you wear on your circuit boards. I could talk about this circuit for quite a while, and I have done on a builder's live stream over on Patreon. In fact, I breadboarded this to kind of figure out what was going on, but I figured out there was a better way of describing what is going on here, and that is by literally building building a visual version of the sequencer. So this right here is something that I bashed together yesterday with the main idea of putting this on the wall with it in the museum, because without lights flashing everywhere, it's really hard to kind of imagine what the actual sequencer is doing and how it is getting to the conclusion of those notes. So I started to figure out on a builder's live stream on Patreon the other day about how best to kind of present this. I started by actually using in the live stream the logic analyzer that I have from the 70's on the chips to kind of describe what was going on, but it just wasn't really cutting the mustard, so I just sort of had to sit down and build the sequencer again. On the back of here is a bit of strip board, and there are a bunch of chips. These are not the same chips that are inside the SWTPC, but they have the same functions as the ones inside the SWTPC, and they were what I had lying around. If you'd like a more detailed look at this, I've actually made the live stream public about this one over on Patreon. So if you want to see a detailed talk about this circuit in general, then please go and check it out over there. So this LED flashing here is the clock, and you can adjust the speed of the clock, and you'll see every time this flashes there is a change in the rest of this sequencer thingamajiggy. Flip-flops are basically the fundamental kind of building blocks of memory. They are sort of like 1-bit pieces of memory. You can store a bit, so you can make it go high or you can make it go low, and all flip-flops have 2 outputs. This is the first flip-flop in the sequencer chain. You can see it's denoted by 1. Q means the output, and then it's also got the opposite of whatever the output is. So as you can see, whenever this one lights on, this one doesn't, and vice versa. So you get 2 outputs of it. You get the on and off, and you get the opposite of what that is. And you'll notice that the same is happening on all of these different flip-flops. The way the sequencer works is this clock is telling these flip-flops to listen to what is going into the flip-flop. This flip-flop talks to this flip-flop, which talks to this flip-flop. As you can see, the sequencer is cascading down in a strange sort of fashion. That's because this one's telling this one going down, and then it goes round in a circle. If you can see on this image, you can see there's Q and inverse Q on all of the flip-flops, and they're wired into the inputs of the next flip-flop going along. And how many times do I need to say flip-flop? So this thing right here is the brain of the sequencer. And then, like on the SWTPC Psych tone, it's got 3 rotary switches right here. As you can see, there are 12 LEDs at the top, and these let you select between 1, which is this one, and 12, which is this one. I'm going to flick it back to 1. Whenever number 1 turns on, this will turn on. You see that? Each of these actually select 1, so whenever this turns on, these all will turn on. So with each of these rotary switches, you can select any manner of combinations between any of these. After that, this signal goes into this knob, this signal goes into this knob, and this signal goes into this knob. And you can select how high you want the note to come out when that knob turns on. But the thing is if there's more than one of these on at a time, these voltages get added together, and then that equals the output. So if all 3 of them are on, it adds all 3 of these knob voltages together, and that makes the highest note, because that's the highest it can possibly be. And if you think about it this way, there are actually 8 different combinations of these lights being on. So that means you have 8 different notes that you can actually send out of this sequencer. So now let's turn on some audio. But I don't think we're going to do this justice until we plug it into Cosmo. So I've now brought the visual representation of the sequencer back to the flat to plug it into Cosmo. So it's got a clock coming from the modular synth that is overtaking the internal clock inside this, and the control voltage out of this is going into a quantized synthesizer voice in the modular, which makes it always in tune, which you don't have to do. It can always be, you know, microtonal and stuff, but I like my pentatonic scale. So we're going to play it with a pentatonic scale now. you can see, the sequencer on its own actually makes quite an interesting sequencer, and I'm working on a module that is inspired by this, so keep your eyes peeled. Anyway, let's go and get this all wired up over at the museum. So that is the end of that for this video today. There is going to be another video on the Museum of Everything Else YouTube channel when I get this put up on the wall, which could even be by the end of today. So go and check out over on that YouTube channel if you want to see what it's going to look like and how it's going to be sort of interactive over here. Like I said, over on my Patreon there is a sound pack from this, and also the song that I made with this, as well as free builders live streams that I did on this whole project over the past week, amongst a load of other content. And needless to say, Patreon supports all of these videos and the museum, which will be opening within the next 2 months. Anyway, I've been Luke Mum No Computer. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe and don't be scared to try it.